All right. I'm with Jacob Siegel, everybody. Welcome to Walk-ins Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you. I mean, you're just a brilliant writer and one of my favorite journalists and writers out there. So I really wanted to talk to you for a while, but more importantly, you wrote this incredibly in-depth, long-form piece, A Guide to Understanding the Hoax of the Century for tablet, and it was amazing. I mean, I don't even know, how do you start to tackle a piece like this?
Well, that's a wonderful introduction, and I'm happy to be here talking.
Everyone should read this. So tell me, yeah, how do you approach a piece like this? What is your process?
Long. It took really, I think, 2.5 years, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah,
How many words was it?
13,400, something like that. Over
Wow.
13,000 words. Yeah. Just to give listeners a bit of context, like a 5,000 word piece is considered long. So this was 2.5 times longer than a long magazine essay.
It's crazy.
And it wasn't my intention. I didn't set out to write a 13,000 word novella length opus. I really was struggling, um, sometimes, very frustratingly struggling to write something that was concise, and I wanted to be as straightforward and accessible as possible. And it turned out that the way to be as straightforward and accessible as I could be was at this length. It was the only way I could manage it. But it was a long process. The piece went through a number of drafts. I think I submitted the first draft in late 2020, I believe, was when the first draft that I wrote of this went in.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are you turning it into a book?
I'm working on a book related to this that'll expand on all of this. Yeah, I'm working on a book about
Yeah.
disinformation right now.
Okay, good. I mean, it's so much information even in the article, and I'm wondering how you became interested in this topic and decided that you wanted to take on such a task.
Yeah, there's a ton of stuff I left out. So as long as it is, I mean, there's so much on the cutting room floor that'll go into the book. But there's a short version and a long version. The short version is that the information regulators, the police state operatives were not especially subtle after 2016. So I feel like one could not avoid this sudden disruption in the reality field whereby disinformation became the overarching structuring concept and mandate, and that seemed to happen, if not overnight, then in sort of a single election season. So in an
Hmm.
immediate sense, I noticed the sudden pervasiveness of disinformation as not simply a tool of censorship. It was something larger than that. It was an organizing principle for most of the federal bureaucracy. So it wasn't simply that people were censoring in the name of disinformation, though, of course, the censorship was significant and raised all sorts of alarms in its own way. More fundamentally, I saw continuity between the counter disinformation effort and the war on terror, which I had been a part of, and which had also been an organizing principle for society, in much the same way that the Cold War had provided an overarching organizational principle that not only structured our efforts against the Soviet Union and other communist countries, but created its own domestic reality inside the United States. So I noticed this happening late 2016 throughout 2017, and was struggling to make sense of it for a while. And so that was the immediate thing that prompted this. And I didn't even really start writing this piece, I think, until 2019. So I was struggling with it for a while. And, I wasn't immediately convinced that every aspect of the Trump Russia collusion claims were a completely contrived, information operation against the president of the United States, as I now believe they were, and as I think that the Mueller report, the IG report, the Durham report have conclusively demonstrated. Initially I was sort of the layers of my belief and disillusionment were being peeled back one at a time. So I remember a sort of pivotal thing for me was realizing that Adam Schiff was not exaggerating, but lying outright. And I just it sort of struck me all of a sudden, because I think my original assumption had been, well, this is overheated, the things that he's saying, these claims about Trump being a Putin agent. This is exaggerated. This is overdone. But there has to be some underlying bedrock layer of reality to this. Not because I thought that, Adam Schiff's integrity demanded that it be so. Not because I thought politicians were incapable of lying. I just assumed that the larger system wouldn't tolerate a lie that egregious, that somebody would perhaps run into legal issues by lying that egregiously, libel issues, or on an even more sort of subtle level, that the social architecture couldn't tolerate, that you would be cast out, you would be made to look like a fool. Within, it's so naive, but I really believed this. So I thought, okay, they're exaggerating. And then hearing continuously throughout 2017, even into 2018, the smoking gun is about to appear, the indictment's going to drop, and realizing, oh, this isn't an exaggeration. This is something much larger than an exaggeration. This is a wholesale fraud in which all of these various actors are not simply reinforcing one another's lies, but are each one countenancing the lies of the other. So they are each making it permissible for the other to lie, contributing to this culture of the larger lie. And I had that realization, and that sort of set the piece in motion. And then in a bit more of a deeper sense, serving as an Army intelligence officer in Afghanistan, had in my own small role, very small as it was, in the war on terror, had sort of acquainted me with what had come to seem like a almost civilization-wide belief in data control and information control as the means to administer society, replacing traditional human-centric politics with data control, was something I was first introduced to in the war on terror, and this sort of merger of big data and surveillance platforms. And then I saw reappear in these sort of weird, crooked ways in the domestic landscape, and putting those two pieces together is how I got where I am.
Is there any way out?
Through. The only way out is through. Yeah. I mean, there's no quick solution. The only way out is through. I'm sorry to say, it's not just that we're in the middle of this. It's only just begun.
Yeah, you say that in the piece, that I love the line, like, this is the end of the beginning.
Yeah, I think this is the end of the beginning, because what disinformation was really about, in some sense, this disinformation being a somewhat fraudulent concept. And that's sort of the argument that I make in this piece, Guide to Understanding the Hoax of the Century, is that the threat of disinformation was willfully, deliberately exaggerated. Not to say there's no such thing as disinformation, but if you think about the way that the threat of terrorism was exaggerated, which it obviously was, to justify, not only to justify an increase in budgets and to justify the creation of this vast counterterrorism bureaucracy, to justify a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan that was very lucrative for defense contractors, lucrative for the State Department, an effective way to launder money coming from the U.S. tax base in this foreign war. And it was all of those things. It was also simply a misunderstanding of the nature of the terrorism threat. Like, well-meaning people simply got it wrong, and so it was a combination of massive financial self-interest colliding with um, well-intentioned error and misunderstanding. And
Mhm.
disinformation is that at a vastly larger scale, because
Mhm.
the cynicism in disinformation, I would argue, is exponentially greater than what was present in the war on terror. The United States was not attacked by Russia in the way that we were attacked by Al Qaeda. And the desperate attempts to conjure this in, people like Nancy Pelosi or Kamala Harris comparing January 6th to the Civil War, or to to Pearl Harbor, which they've done, is this effort to conjure a modern threat on par with those historical threats in order to justify what has effectively been the declaration of martial law online, which is the government saying we cannot tolerate freedom on the internet because the threat is so grave, either from domestic extremism, or from disinformation, which are related threats, and so therefore we have to suspend due process, suspend the Bill of Rights, and take control over the information space. But this was much more cynical than in the case of 9/11, in the sense that we weren't attacked. There weren't thousands of people killed. Russia meddled in the election, as far as we can now tell, in a fairly inconsequential, small way, as it had done before. And this, you know, illegitimate. It's not. I'm not supporting Russian election interference, obviously, but this illegitimate but fairly small and inconsequential Russian election meddling was blown up into this vast conspiracy as a deliberate partisan strategy by the Clinton campaign, by senior intelligence operatives in the United States, and then later with the enthusiastic cooperation of the American press establishment, journalism, academics, the sort of nonprofit expert space. They all jumped on board and conjured into existence this dire existential threat from disinformation, which justified, in their telling, justified the the calls to move beyond free speech and free and open discourse as an antiquated, obsolete concept that was no longer applicable to the information age, because it was simply too dangerous to allow unfettered free speech in the 21st century, where if you did that, Russia could infiltrate your information system, or domestic extremists could radicalize young men into becoming Proud Boys, or like QAnon, Pizzagate people, or whatever. And this was the sort of the great lie of disinformation. But beyond that, what motivated that, aside from the sort of immediate like partisan advantage of how do we discredit Donald Trump, was this attempt to put the genie of the internet back in the bottle, right? Like,
Right.
social media emerged, threatened these established hierarchies, and so they came up with the disinformation threat as a way of justifying their monopolistic military control over these platforms that threatened them.
Yeah, it makes one quite cynical. And just even hearing and reading this piece, that was my first gut instinct, is how do you find your way out? I feel like we continuously vote for the Patriot Act to remain. It's like that should have been gone ages ago, and they continuously layer things on top of erosions online, like you said. There's a line in here that I love that Kaufman had that I kind of want you to explain, where he says, if you torture hybrid warfare long enough, it will tell you anything.
Yeah. So Michael Kaufman is a security analyst. He's still around now. You can find him writing about Ukraine and sort of NATO defense matters. And he's referring to this concept of hybrid warfare and hybrid war theory, which became really popular, especially among sort of NATO defense establishment people in the early 2010s, and then became really popular when Russia launched its invasion of Crimea, and then sort of added irregular warfare components to the Euromaidan situation in Ukraine, where the U.S. had backed this Euromaidan movement to depose the Russian-backed previous leader of Ukraine, and Russia-backed the other side. Hybrid war referred to this idea that in the information age and in the digital age, warfare, rather than simply being fought through physical acts between militaries on the battlefield, now takes place through this combination of conventional tactics, irregular tactics, so uniformed soldiers, plus kind of mercenaries in civilian clothes, plus this whole component of propaganda and influence operations online. And the online dimension became especially important. And people who were talking about hybrid war in 2014 were also talking about it in reference to ISIS, the Islamic State, which had this very active social media presence and really like captivating, sort of, you couldn't look away from it. It was barbaric, it was lurid, but it was also sort of presented in this way that was a spectacle where you couldn't look away from it. And so ISIS had its social media campaign. Russia was launching these influence operations, both online and through social media, and also on Russia Today. And all of that together fed into this idea that hybrid warfare was, the most cutting edge version of war, was the future of war. And it also led to this idea that what these groups were doing online was as consequential, if not more consequential, than what they were doing on the battlefield. So ISIS might struggle to hold on to the territory it had captured in Syria, which was the case in 2014, even as its social media campaign was going crazy. It was losing Kobani, it was losing these key territories, even as it was going on to take Mosul and declare its caliphate in northern Iraq. It was suffering battlefield losses anywhere, but that was somehow less important than the fact that it had this really active and alluring social media presence. So that's sort of the background for hybrid warfare. But as Kaufman was pointing out, once you say, like, the social media campaign is as consequential as what's going on the battlefield, and moreover, once you say that the social media campaign is part of some continuum of warfare, then you can draw or not draw the line anywhere. So then, are people in the West who retweet an ISIS person, are they part of the ISIS military campaign? Are people in the West who say things that echo, even if they don't directly retweet a Kremlin agent, are they part of the Russian operation? And so it became this very amorphous, expansionary category that could mean anything and nothing. And that's what Kaufman was getting at, that having created such a vague and expansionary definition of what war was about, you could make that mean anything, and you could apply that to your political enemies, or you could apply it to things that didn't really have anything to do with warfare in a strict sense, which of course is exactly what happened. And the last point to make on this is, like, the people who were objecting to this at the time, and it's sort of been forgotten now, but some of the strongest objections to this in 2014 and 2015 were Eastern European security officials who were actually very afraid of Russia, and who said the problem with this hybrid warfare stuff is it gives the West an excuse to not actually do anything about Russia's military adventures and Russia's military expansion, because these Western and NATO defense officials can say, hey, we're contributing to the war effort by our own social media campaigns to counter
Right.
Russia. But like some Baltic state defense ministry guy is like, I don't care what they're saying on social media if I can't defend my ports. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
that's the sort of background on hybrid war and what Kaufman meant by that.
Guys, getting older sucks. That's why it's so important to take care of yourself and pay attention to your health. This is something a lot of men ignore, and it is so important. If you hate going to the doctor and dealing with the hassle, we've got the perfect solution for you. With Quest Health's line of tests for men, you can order a multitude of men's health panel tests that keep you informed about your health. You can check your testosterone levels, get a prostate screening, a colorectal screening, or take their comprehensive men's health profile test for a more complete picture of your health and wellness. Purchase lab tests online, visit a nearby Quest Diagnostics location for a sample collection, no doctor's visit required, or get immediate results at home with at-home test kits. Your results are delivered online, quickly, and discreetly. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code WALKINS25 to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code WALKINS25 for 25% off. Link in the description below. Yeah, there's another point you make early on in the piece that stuck out to me about how the media is a nice kind of fall guy. You know, a lot of people have said, "Oh, this is like the media and the journalists, and they're the people who have really dropped the ball." And you mentioned that they had been kind of hollowed out and used as a puppet, and it was really much more sinister than just the media. Although they take part in this, they're, like you mentioned, just kind of they take the blame for all of it.
Yeah, I mean, the journalists are the dupes in this story. They're the
Yeah.
patsies. They're not the ones planning the heist. They're not the ones pulling off the heist. They're sure as hell not the ones who are like making off with the loot. You know, they're the
Mm.
patsies. They got handed these ridiculous stories like the Steele dossier, and they ran with them. And their role was important. Don't get me wrong. You know, the use of the media as a bullhorn to promote these stories, to sort of pull tens of millions of Americans into this information operation, first as spectators and then later as sort of passive participants by turning it into this culture war theater, was important.
Mhm.
But journalists didn't come up with any of this. They are not directing these narratives. They are they're useful as they're useful instrumentally, but they are not the key to understanding this story. And there's a risk in focusing too heavily on the journalists that you will miss the role of the intelligence agencies and the political operatives and the billionaires funding the nonprofits, who are really the key drivers of this, insofar as they are the ones who established the institutional basis for prosecuting this information war, for spreading these narratives, credentialing these narratives. And yeah, it's like there's plenty to criticize in
Yeah.
journalism, um, but yeah, it's not where the story starts nor where it ends.
Yeah, that's I think what's so unsettling is the feeling that, as you mentioned in the piece, there are these algorithms now that just invisibly direct what gets elevated, what, I think maybe along the way, somebody, one of these puppet masters realized that censoring people, it's like the Streisand effect. It gives them more power and more, and it's actually better if you just kind of make them invisible, make things that you don't want invisible. So there just seems to be, I mean, I encounter it. It's hard not to get paranoid. I think it makes it makes one
Mhm.
paranoid because I encounter it on YouTube where we always kind of joke, is this the algorithm or do we just suck? And it might be both. There could be a combination of both, but you can see something getting traction and then it's like an invisible foot just steps on it. And you can see it in the numbers. You can see it's going crazy, going gangbusters by any kind of anything that you would think you would know about virality and the way the internet works. That shouldn't be, then it just falls off a cliff invisibly and gets no views, from getting thousands. So when we see that stuff, we're like, what is that weird? And it might just be the AI and these kind of tripwires that you hit, and then you're like, you don't exist.
And then you don't exist. And
Yeah.
and you could get caught in the paranoia loop in some degree of paranoia, I would argue, is quite healthy and reasonable in the current environment. But it's not necessarily the most productive mental framework, excuse me, for approaching this problem. The problem is there is too much unaccountable black box power. That's the fundamental problem. So if you take apart the black box and you open it up and you reveal the decision-making processes, then all of a sudden you've re-entered the realm of human politics. YouTube made this decision for this reason. We object to it. We think that it sucks, but it's legal, whatever. But what produces the paranoia and then gets you caught in a cycle in which you are paralyzed because you are paranoid and yet completely incapable of affecting the thing that is making you paranoid is the degree to which the most powerful institutions in our society, arguably the most powerful institutions that have ever existed, certainly the most powerful corporations, arguably, that have ever existed in the history of the world, make decisions in a manner that is not only inscrutable to humans, but is increasingly becoming structurally inaccessible to humans insofar as it's being outsourced to AI models that cannot be understood even by their program. So what does that mean? In a practical sense, in the only way out is through sense, part of what it means is we have to go past the algorithms, go past the AIs to the people controlling the algorithms, who are ultimately the decision makers here and who have to be made in some way accountable for what these things do and the way in which they affect our lives. And that is true, I would argue, even absent the kind of state corporate collusion we now know exists, but becomes not simply true, but an urgent imperative to deal with now that we know that these algorithms are not just they're not simply reflective of the priorities inside the corporations. They reflect top-down, state level, from the White House in some cases, as we learned from the Twitter files and ongoing lawsuits like the one in Missouri, top down, state directed, White House directed political operations. And the paranoia is a reasonable response, but you can get lost inside of it.
What's the lawsuit in Missouri for people listening?
So that's the one that I'm going to butcher his name. It's a number of doctors. Aaron Cariardi, who just wrote a piece about this for Tablet, where I'm an editor, that I really recommend people check out. And Jay Bacciaria, I'm sure I've screwed up his name, and I apologize to him. He's a smart guy. But effectively, it's a lawsuit about government censorship and the government tech corporation censorship, and the disclosures from it have been extraordinary, as brought by the Attorney General of Missouri, and it's about the constitutionality of what's happening. It's probably going to go to the Supreme Court. It's an extremely important case. The disclosures from it are extraordinary. So we have things like, in the disclosures, we have things like Jen Easterly, who's the current head of CISA, the cybersecurity agency inside the State Department that really led the so-called election integrity efforts, where millions of posts online were flagged and in some way censored or suppressed, ostensibly on behalf of election integrity, but really in ways that are very directly tied into political agendas. And we have Jen Easterly, the head of CISA. You see in the disclosure, like at one point, she's quoted as saying that it's dangerous when people have access to their own facts, that CISAs, because, we live in a post-truth world and people can't be trusted to make these judgments about, which facts are real facts. And so we need the government information regulators to protect them. And so this comes back in a very direct way to the hybrid war theory stuff, right? Because this is the domestic use of military concepts and military technologies to protect us from threats. Easterly, the head of CISA, right, whose job was supposed to be about protecting infrastructure, right? It's an infrastructure agency, now declares that includes, and I'm quoting, cognitive infrastructure, meaning
That is insane.
meaning people's thoughts, the spaces
Yeah.
online in which they form and share
This
and
is
disseminate
nuts.
those thoughts. And yeah.
There's a great line that you have in the piece that this reminds me of, where basically we can't be trusted with our own minds, which I feel like is what you're talking about. They're saying we can't trust those idiots to go through information on their own. And this kind of leads into the next question I have and the next portion of your piece. We had all of the election stuff and then COVID hit, and that became like, oh, now it's about, our health, and now it's about maintaining the disinformation and misinformation and malinformation and around something as serious as a pandemic can't be tolerated. And I was shocked to see so many liberals jump on board with all of this. That was really, I don't know, that was wild to me.
Yeah, I mean, I probably should have been more shocked, but it's all part of one single continuous operating system, as it were. In other words, like the censorship of foreign disinformation carried out by organizations like CISA, who get involved in censoring what is ostensibly foreign disinformation after 2016. This other State Department agency called the Global Engagement Center, which is really the hub, the central hub of counter disinformation, foreign influence task force that the FBI heads, which has a seat inside the social media companies, has a seat in Twitter, holds weekly meetings with not only Twitter executives, but also other social media executives and other government agencies, including the CIA, which attends these weekly meetings. It's referred to as like other agency by some euphemism in the disclosures that have come out about this. But that's all supposedly what justifies this vast, profound erosion of constitutional liberties is foreign disinformation. Right? It all starts, as I lay out in the piece, with the Foreign Propaganda, Disinformation and Propaganda Act signed into law by Obama just as he's leaving office at the end of 2016. So it starts off, it's ostensibly all about Russia, all about foreign disinformation. Then it rapidly transitions from foreign disinformation to domestic misinformation. And then by the time COVID comes around, and domestic misinformation at that time refers in one sense to people who are echoing Russian narratives inside the US. So even though they're Americans and their speech ought to be protected, this new category, misinformation, essentially calling back to this idea of hybrid warfare, puts them in league with the Russian government because they are inadvertently or intentionally echoing these Russian disinformation narratives. So now they're spreading domestic misinformation, which also includes domestic extremism and white nationalist groups, etc. All that falls under the category of misinformation. And then that leads directly into this massive expansion of the entire censorship and information regulation apparatus under the pretext that we need it in order to stave off dangerous misinformation people who are literally threatening, tens of millions of people's lives by, through their vaccine skepticism or their oppositional lockdowns. But of course, in practice, the people who get lumped into this could be doing things as correct and truthful as stating, for instance, that the COVID virus originated in a Chinese laboratory, which
Right.
would have violated the misinformation standards of virtually every major internet platform at one point or another, because all of those platforms based their misinformation policies during COVID on whatever was coming from global health authorities or US government. So whatever the NIH was saying, or the CDC or the WHO was saying at a given time, set the standard. But those agencies, as we know, reversed their policies quite often during the pandemic. So, the
Right.
Fauci, of course, has now famously admitted to having lied about the effectiveness of masking. He now says, in order to protect the stock of masks, he initially said they were ineffective. Then he said they were effective. So it's simply, in other words, we saw this massive expansion under COVID, supposedly to protect, lives that were at risk. But the people who were being censored were often right, where in any event, their speech should have been constitutionally protected. And in many cases, like the policy setters were the people who were engaged in the most egregious misrepresentations of facts, like Fauci, for example, on a number of occasions, or the WHO, which, cravenly sort of deferred to the official Chinese account of COVID's origins initially, but was put in a position to determine what hundreds of millions of Americans were supposed to be allowed to think and say online.
So wild. I mean, there are all these mashups of things that these people in power say online now, and it's shocking to me that people aren't more outraged about this. And even at the start of your piece, you talk about how all of the, Hamilton 68 stuff really just came and went. It should have been something that people were upset about, but I always look at, right now everybody's like all up in arms about the pride. So is it all just a distraction from this? It all feels like people are like, yeah, get mad. Culture wars are great. Kill each other over all this stuff. I mean, I remember when Biden, and I think you referenced this in your piece too, he online accused the social media companies of killing people.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's
Um,
like,
extraordinary thing. And at that same time that he was doing that, that's also when the White House was delivering a list. We know this from the Missouri case. It came out in the court documents that the White House was demanding that certain people, including Alex Berenson, be booted from Twitter. And
yeah.
Twitter complied. They went along with that. The thing that Berenson was booted for, saying that vaccines don't prevent transmission, turned out to be true. Now, people have their objections to Berenson, but this is all constitutionally protected speech. And in this case, he was right. The most incredible thing is that the organization, so Biden's whole claim, the talking point you're referencing about how people were being killed and the social media companies had blood on their hands. In that same talking point, he said that there was a so-called like disinformation dozen who was responsible for spreading the vast majority of vaccine-related disinformation online. And then White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki had said the same thing. The incredible thing is this whole concept of the disinformation dozen came from this partisan British nonprofit with no expertise in any of this. So it's just like American nonprofits, this kind of astroturfed, like fake expert partisan operation that had come up with this, never really substantiated at all. It was like very shoddy work that had gone into this. And it goes from this astroturfed disinformation nonprofit in Britain to a White House talking point virtually overnight. It just shows you
Right.
like how flimsy and shoddy this is, and this is where the loss of a functioning press becomes really devastating because I called them out on this at the time. I was writing then. I now edit it. Tablet's daily newsletter, The Scroll. People should sign up. It's good, but I wrote a thing in The Scroll like, this is insane. This British nonprofit that furnished this White House talking point is itself transparently partisan, and there's no proof for any of this. And yet, like, the New York Times went along with it, and this sort of pillars of establishment journalism simply repeated the stuff that really wasn't. You didn't have to dig very far to see how ridiculous it was, but they didn't want to dig at all.
Well, and then you have the rise of kind of people with no credibility who get things wrong all the time. And the joke is like the Alex Jones was right jar fills up. And we always kind of joke on our show Dumpster Fire, where we make fun of all of this, like a broken pundit is right, twice a day. Yeah. So then people left in this vacuum feeling, because as I always say, reality remains undefeated. So you can try and suppress the information that the vaccine doesn't stop transmission and tell people that it's misinformation, but they're going to see that they got the vaccine and got COVID and gave it to someone else. You can't stop that. You can't stop reality from occurring in front of people. And it creates such a cognitive dissonance for people that I think it's easier either to retreat into the bosom of like big state, we know what's best for the people, or where many people have run to, which is just no man's land conspiracy theory, but maybe true. Wild West. Yeah. And neither one of those places is really truthful or accurate or helpful psychologically to people.
I agree. Totally agree. And I would not advise anyone to get involved in either one of those tendencies. But only one of them involves the monopoly of state power coercing people into thinking certain things. And, the problem with conspiracy thinking is that it disables reason, because you get so invested in pattern matching, you lose the ability to make meaningful distinctions. And that's where meaning begins, is in making distinctions. It's like, that's how, if you believe the biblical narrative literally, or if you understand it metaphorically, in either case, creation is breathed into being through division between day and night, between water and land, and that's where meaning comes from, and stable reality comes from it. Conspiracy thinking undermines that. On the other hand, the thing you were describing, which I think is so important, is that what the sort of information regulation approach has done is to take the counterterrorism approach and marry that to big data, and then apply it to American citizens in place of politics, right? We have entered an age in which America's ruling party no longer believes, not only does it no longer believe that it needs to uphold the Bill of Rights, it no longer believes that it needs to engage in politics, which is an art that requires persuasion, compromise, human engagement. All of what we have witnessed over the past 7 years is an attempt to short circuit that, to circumvent it, and to build a new superstructure on top of the existing framework. And that new superstructure does away with, not only does it do away with the Bill of Rights, it does away with the formal mechanisms of government, representative government, and it replaces them with this top-down, invisible back end of the internet information regulation approach to power and control, and where democratic politics is about people being involved in making decisions about the institutions that affect them, making decisions about their own leaders. This new system of information regulation does away with all of that, says that people cannot be trusted to make those decisions, and therefore this is up to the experts, the technocrats, the intelligence officials, the Obama and Clinton partisans, a whole coterie of people who are sort of have joined into this ad hoc coalition in this ruling party, and who simply don't believe that democratic voting rights need to be protected. To them, protecting democracy is about making sure the right person gets elected, not about making sure that the voters have the ability to choose their own representatives. Then, when reality intrudes in the way you're saying it always does, which of course, like, the bill will come due. You say the vaccines prevent transmission. Eventually, the bill is going to come due. But what this new information regulation, information control approach does is it makes it so that when the bill comes due, the people in power can assimilate the resistance to the false reality they've created as a form of extremism or disinformation that then justifies even more expansion of their power. So this is the sort of perverse cycle of it. It's like the bill comes due, reality comes due. They say that's even more extremism, therefore we need even more power.
Right. And they're never, as you mentioned in your piece, they will never be accused or labeled as people who spread disinformation. So even if they're blatantly spreading disinformation, it's all seems like such a projection. And is it bipartisan? When you say the ruling class the ruling people behind these driving forces, is this something that is one-sided, or is it everyone's in on it?
Everyone's in on it, but the Democrats they lead the dance. The Republicans are the sort of junior members of the ruling party, but no, there's a bipartisan or a uniparty element to it, and there are people in both parties outside of it, nominally attached to both parties, who are outside of it to some extent, more so on the Republican side, because the Republicans, largely, I think, actually for structural economic reasons about who their voter base is, have less representation inside of it. But yeah, it's basically both parties.
Yeah, the thing that's interesting to me as I hear you talk too is how this paranoia has infected everybody. And you saw it post Hillary with, the election was not necessarily stolen, although that was implied by the Russians, and they start this kind of disinformation campaign, and then the obvious, conspiracy that that the election was stolen when Trump won. I mean, it seems like no one, because rightly they know that there are these forces that have subverted democracy. It seems like no one in the population really trusts the results of an election anymore. People asked me, do I believe that Hillary won? Yes, I did, because I have to believe that Hillary won, that Trump won and Hillary lost. Did I believe that? Yes, I have to believe that. If I don't believe that, democracy is already failing. I already don't believe in the results of the election, so it's already failed if I can't trust that Trump won. Same thing when he lost. Do I believe that he lost? Yeah, I have to. It's either I believe that happened, or I believe that our democracy is already not working. And maybe that's me being naive. Maybe it's already not working, and I'm just a rube.
I'm not going to call you a rube, but for myself personally, I think that the Trump people, being not the most competent or reasonable people in the world, focused their objections to the 2020 election on a lot of really nutty conspiracy theory stuff, Venezuelan Dominion voting machine stuff. It all looked like a like carnival barker. Now, of course, the media is not sympathetic to this cause, and so there was some effort made to heighten the ridiculousness of some of these claims. But you didn't have to heighten it that much because they were going with the throw everything against the wall and see what sticks approach. And
Hmm.
communist voting machines is not an especially convincing argument. However,
Right.
when you look at the role that the information regulation technocracy played in the 2020 election, all of which occurred through ostensibly legal means, through vehicles like what was called the Election Integrity Project that involved this company, Graphica, Stanford University, very high level people in coordination with the cybersecurity agency, cybersecurity and infrastructure agency inside the State Department. All of this legal, but effectively amounted to a mass censorship campaign that, for instance, was crucial in purging the Hunter Biden laptop story from public discourse in the weeks before the election. The more meaningful case to have made about electoral interference, in my opinion, even more sort of dramatic than, you can make an argument about election laws having been changed for mail-in ballots. And there are arguments to be had, but that in some sense is politics. The
Right.
the changing of the mail-in ballot stuff decides maybe it's dirty politics, but it's politics. But the creation of an industrial scale censorship machinery operating behind the scenes, censoring true and constitutionally protected information. Like, I don't know how you can have fair and free elections in that kind of environment, because you have prevented politics from occurring.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me somewhat of when you were talking about that's just politics. We always joke, is it gerrymandering or redistricting, depending on who's doing it? So if your team's doing it, it's redistricting. And if it's the other team, it's gerrymandering. And it seems dirty sometimes, but it also seems like
Right.
politics. And it does seem to go back and forth. But yeah, there was something much more sinister. The Hunter Biden thing was sinister. That was so blatantly sinister.
That was
And
bad.
I think, like you said, it's easier to blame the media. They're a good scapegoat. And now people are rightfully mad at the media who's let them down in many ways. But you feel so powerless. I'm so powerless against the YouTube algorithm. And then I see what is popping up in this kind of environment, and that's chilling to me too. The language people use to get around the algorithms, it's so creepy. Everyone just jokes about it. It's a meme now. Oh, I'm gonna unalive myself. They use these terms, but this is like very dark or Orwellian stuff when you're using another language essentially to try and get around these AI censors.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people are responding to. I'm like, you're responding to state mandated censorship essentially in many cases. They'll say it's like, oh, the free markets, we need to do this because we have advertisers, but it's not that. I felt like that became so clear during COVID how linked these two things, the corporate and the state, are, that I don't know if people can really face it head on. It feels like people just want to retreat away from it and act like it's not happening.
Yeah, I think that's both true and to some extent understandable.
Right.
It's
What are you going to
too
do?
grim. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
It's too grim. It's like, let's say you're 65, right? And you've lived your whole life in America, and you had your problems with this politician or that politician, but you've invested your whole life in this country. You're still at an age where you can be sort of actively involved in politics. You're 65, so you have a lot of time to spend watching the news and like getting invested in whatever cable news talk show hosts are talking about. And then you or I come along and say, no, the whole political system is no longer what you think it is. And the system of constitutional democracy no longer exists and has been replaced wholesale through this, and you don't even know that it's been replaced because there's an information war being waged against you specifically to deceive you and deprive you of your constitutional rights. And the people responsible for this, many of them are the ones you think are the good guys, perhaps, or
Right.
or maybe you're on the other side, and it's like all of this is happening, but oh, by the way, like simply voting for this MAGA politician won't fix any of this. So there's no easy out in that way either, and it's too much for people to assimilate. It's too much. And the thing that's so disgusting about this on a visceral level, when I think about what's so appalling, it's not for me the violation of the principle that's so appalling. That's bad. I guess I can see how, constitutional principles are good and therefore you shouldn't flagrantly trample on them. But the thing that turns my stomach is when I think about these millions of people who have been brought into this and made into sort of combatants and
Hmm.
conditioned through an active information operation targeting them, waged by their own government, waged by their supposed social betters and the expert class, that has conditioned them to view their fellow citizens as the enemy, to believe in absurd, farcical conspiracies like the Trump was a Russian agent or the Steele dossier, or to make fools of themselves by saying that the Hunter Biden laptop is no big deal and anybody who cares about 51 high level intelligence officials lying about something to the American public, and then a mass campaign of censorship to purge it from the official record, that all of this is like a nothing burger or whatever the meme of the day is. I could get mad at those people for saying these kinds of things, and sometimes I do get mad at them. But on the other hand, you know, they're being told this by all of these people who they're sort of conditioned to trust and who they're
Right.
supposed to be able to believe. And it's sickening.
Yeah. I mean, there's something really dark and sinister about not allowing people to trust their own mind. To go back to that point, this is like such a red flag for me when I deal with, my girlfriends who are dating a guy and he's kind of making her feel crazy if she has some, like, you can tell this guy's a douchebag and he's got a little bit of scumminess to him. And you're like, he's probably not up to, there might be shenanigans. And then he has some behavior that might be strange and she, catches him in lies and he basically tells her she's crazy. That's what I feel like the relationship between America and the government and the technocracy is right now, where they're like, we feel like you guys are cheating on us and something's going on. And they're like, you're crazy. You can't be trusted.
Yeah.
Maybe you're getting your period, America.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
That's how it feels.
That,
And what are
that's
you going to
right.
do? It's gaslighting. It is gaslighting. And it's just
Well, what do you tell your
on a
girlfriend to
massive
do?
get out. But
Yeah.
where do you go?
You go local. You go smaller. You unplug from the national politics. You don't have to leave America, but you stop allowing yourself. Although a lot of people are, and if that's what you want to do, go for it. But it's still a great country. Like I
Hmm.
personally, I like Americans, and I like
Yeah.
the American landscape, and I like American history, and I like the principles on which America was founded, and I like that America was founded on principles. A lot of countries weren't founded on principles. They
Right.
were sort of founded on certain ethnic populations and the myths around them or whatever. That's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's so much to love about America. And I'm not saying people have to give up on that, but you can detach yourself from the gaslighting, abusive boyfriend of national political culture, of the expert class that knows better than you do what's in your interest and um, makes you feel stupid and unwanted and then punishes you for noticing that. You can detach yourself from all of that without detaching yourself from politics. And in fact, like, I'm not saying people should become apolitical or go be trad wives or be like, Kaczynski's or whatever. That's, I don't think it's a workable solution.
Yeah.
Like,
we,
this is the world we live in, but in detaching yourself from that national political culture, which is mostly just theater anyway, most of this stuff doesn't affect you. You would have been better off and better informed. Truly, you would have been better informed about the political situation in America if you had missed 100% of the headlines about national politics between 2016 and 2020. They were so thoroughly tainted with not
hmm
just lies, but with irrelevancies and culture war theatrics and these fables that were you know spun out of the political ambitions of people who don't care about you and will never care about you. And so why should your life be dominated about the narratives that they want to present to you? Join your local school board, participate in politics that way, vote for whatever the mayor of your city, your county elected official. Develop other interests, like have real friends
Yeah.
and get away from the thing that's making you crazy.
Yeah. It's hard though, I think, for people who are, I mean, I guess you would have to just unplug and go offline. Like someone like me, I would love to do that, but I make my living making jokes online and I ran afoul of censors and things like that all the time. And there doesn't feel like much I can do about it. Do you think Elon has been overall good for Twitter?
Yeah, if I'm doing a pass fail, I would say overall good. I think that the way he handled the Substack thing was um, terrible and
Yeah, that's
self-defeating,
weird.
and
Yeah.
also shows that and was a useful, I think, episode insofar as it revealed that ultimately whatever is ostensible free speech principles, what he is fundamentally is like a supremely powerful billionaire. He's the 800-pound gorilla, and principle matters far less than whatever he's feeling on a given day, and he
Yeah.
operates by
Or
like whim
minute.
and instinct.
Yeah, yeah. He's a mercurial, bazillionaire.
Right,
That's just,
right,
I
and
mean, it's
yeah,
they don't hear no very often. They don't
right,
hear like even if they do, there's ways to I don't know. I've been around people that wealthy. They live in a different world.
right.
It's a different they live in a completely different reality where there are not many boundaries
Right.
and limitations.
So it's not a long term solution. I do think that on the balance, what he did was incredibly important. The Twitter
Mhm.
files provided us with a glimpse into the true history of the past decade we simply wouldn't have had without it. and revealed really crucial facts about the mechanics of collusion between the state and the tech companies which control the information space, and the degree to which they have been merged and are no longer independent entities. And that is, I say in the piece, I don't think America is a fascist country, but this is the actual technical definition of fascism.
Right.
Everyone thinks it has to do with like armbands and cool uniforms and hating Jews or something, but that's like on top of the merger of state, the corporate state merger, and that has really happened, and we wouldn't know about that or the way in which it had happened without Elon. On a personal level, like I was saying, I struggled for years to write this piece, and the Twitter files really cracked it open for me, especially the first Twitter files that Taibbi did on Hamilton 68. It just sort of gave me a way to show this to people so that they couldn't write me off. Because part of the problem was like I would do these versions of it, and even smart people would be like, "You're crazy."
What do you think about, did you see, I feel like I saw some kind of poster or something for, Schellenberger going over and doing something, I think, with Russell Brand about the censorship industrial complex, or is what they've been calling it. Is that, what do you think about that? Is that something that's helpful? Is it like,
Well, given that they generously invited me to that, I think it's extraordinarily
oh, good.
helpful.
I'm
And
glad they invited you.
yeah, yeah, I was also glad, and I like Schellenberger a lot, and I don't know exactly where Russell Brand lands on all of this stuff. I know he's been getting more political in recent years, but I don't really know. I know he gets lumped in with Rogan sometimes, though they seem to me to be such totally different characters and types. So I don't know exactly what to make of Russell Brand, but look, I think it's a good thing. I think bringing different people working on this into one space is important to share notes. Like I have to say, like Schellenberger he was a really big early champion of my piece, as was Taibbi, as was Greenwald. And it's not only personally gratifying, but it was um, important because it meant that my piece reached a much larger audience. And people can be very, writers are, such insecure, territorial people a lot of the
Yeah.
time. It was nice to see that. And so that was a real adjustment for me coming out of the military and becoming a writer. And I mean, I'd always been writing, and I always thought of myself as a writer, but it's a real adjustment in terms of this sort of, I don't know what you could call it. The workplace culture of the Army is somewhat different than the workplace culture of journalism. So
How did you end up in
that's
journalism?
well, it was the family profession. My brother worked in journalism. My father had been had a newspaper column for some
Where are
years.
you from?
So Brooklyn,
Okay.
New York, and uh, yeah, my dad, Fred Siegel, just passed
Oh,
away
I'm
a
sorry.
month
Oh,
ago.
I'm so
Thank you.
sorry.
He was a wonderful man and wrote a column for years for the New York Post and wrote for various other places as well, and was a brilliant guy, and left behind some brilliant books. Um, the Revolt Against the Masses, I would really recommend to people who want to understand this sort of technocratic mindset that we've been talking about. Uh, so that was how I got into it. But in a broader sense, in the immediate sense, I had been writing fiction. I was working on a novel. I had published this anthology, the first anthology of fiction by Iraq and Afghanistan veterans called Fire and Forget. Myself, Phil Cly, Royce Grant, Matt Gallagher, and some other people. We put it out, got some success, literary fiction success, which means it sold 1,000 copies or whatever. But that was the route I was going to go down. And then when I got back from Afghanistan in 2012, um, there was this push to hire veterans in newsrooms. And one of the places doing that was the Daily Beast, where my brother was. And they started this veterans related initiative called the Hero Project. And so, yeah, so I got in through that and quickly sort of branched out into other things.
Well, I'm glad that all of those guys shared your piece. I feel like there are some of the journalists that I've interviewed so many journalists over the past, I guess, going on 5 years now. It'll be 5 years this fall that I've been doing this podcast and talked so much about, and I've interviewed Matt and Glenn and their, friends. I would call them friends now. And I never really know where they're going to land on things. And as I've talked to people who write about this, and I always ask the question, who do you go to for your news, particularly when people are writing about this and talking about this? And I think there are people that I tend to go to because I'm not really sure exactly. I feel like they will do their best to try and cut through a lot of the bullshit, but their kind of worldview is formed by what you describe in this piece. So they have knowledge and extensive experience butting up against this. And I feel like that's why I trust them more than other journalists and yourself too, because I don't know how you can be a journalist if you aren't informed by this in today's day and age.
I don't know either.
So who do you
I
go
don't know
to?
either. I go to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about like Taibbi is a reporter.
He's a reporter.
Taibbi's, and so there are a lot of journalists. There's not a lot of reporters, and he's like going out and talking to people and digging and getting stories.
Yep.
And there are a lot of people writing takes and telling you why, the latest thing that celebrity X did was like the greatest achievement for whatever trans Eskimos since whenever, or why like why whatever politician Y did was the worst fascist thing since Hitler did that other thing. It's like, so there's a lot of that going around. There are not a lot of reporters. So I appreciate that he does that. Who do I go to? I mean, I tend to look to different places for different things. So, I read the American Prospect, which is a left-wing magazine for, I think some of their stuff on industry capture is some of the best in the business. They just had a very good piece the other day, I think it was by Ryan Cooper, on why pharmaceuticals are so expensive and how drug prices are affected by the sort of patent racket that the drug companies run.
Right.
So they do that really well. I go to Zero Hedge to find out like what's happening at the margins of the global economy that are the early indicators of what the next big economic shifts might be. I go to sort of different. I go to the Financial Times, a British publication, to read about world markets. I go to Breitbart for their tech reporting. I think they have Breitbart has really excellent reporting on the tech industry. And then I go to Tablet for like everything else.
Yeah, Tablet's great.
Yeah. So I'm sorry if that's not a satisfying answer, and I can certainly name some other journalists, but there's no one place. And I should also say that given that I'm in the news business, I really do try to avoid reading any more news than I absolutely have to. And there are a lot of things I just skim.
Yeah.
So I feel like I get enough. And if it's important, it'll stick with me and I'll come back to it in a day or something.
Yeah.
And so that's my approach.
Taibbi's dad was also a reporter, and he said something that really stuck with me on the podcast about how his father used to come home and he would just go through his Rolodex of sources and would call them randomly just to check in on their families and see how they were doing. And he had this whole thing that you can't only call sources when you need something. You need to have a relationship with them. I just loved it. It's something.
Can I tell you, this is my favorite story from my time in journalism, which is 10 years now I've been working in the business. My favorite story is there's a New York reporter, classic New York character named Michael Daly. He's written for the Daily News. He's a Daily Beast now. Daly's won a Pulitzer Prize. Not a Pulitzer. Yeah, Pulitzer.
Mm-hmm.
He won something big. Michael's a legend. Michael Daly. Legendary, like New York character. Phenomenal reporter. The best sources inside the police department. Like incredible sources. The police department, the fire department in New York. And when the Black Lives Matter protests started in New York, I was covering them for the Daily Beast, and I was going out to all these protests. And originally the thing that had set off protests in New York was there was this guy named Eric Ferguson who had died when a police officer placed him in a chokehold after he was trying to sell these cigarettes illegally, and that had set off some protests. And I was covering those, and then I was covering the even bigger protests after Ferguson. And eventually, this is a longer story, but eventually I discovered this group that seemed to be sort of leading the protests that was called Justice League NYC, that later became the leadership of the Women's March. And I later ended up doing a big piece about the Women's March years later. So had I not been covering the Black Lives Matter protests, I wouldn't have discovered the group leading them, which I then did all this reporting on and figured out that they were both leading the protests in New York, and as I discovered, had these very extensive connections to City Hall and to the governor. So it's this classic New York and big city political situation, inside, outside, where they were leading the protests, but also had special access to leading political figures. Long story short, I was out at one of these protests, and it was like 10:30 at night in downtown Brooklyn. And who do I run into randomly on the street there? Michael Daly, who must have been in his, I would say at least in his early 60s at the time. What was Daly doing there? Not writing about it. It's his city. It's in Brooklyn. It's his city. Something's happening. He's going to be there to figure it out, to see what's going on, to talk to people. He wasn't writing anything. He never ended up writing anything about it. He was just there to be there, to talk to people.
Right.
And he ended up getting me the phone number of one of the people involved, one of the protest leaders, who then became a key figure in this story. And I was like, I didn't do that kind of work as a reporter. I'll be honest with you. I didn't have that work ethic. I don't have those social skills.
Yeah.
Frankly. But that's what separates me from a Michael Daly.
Yeah.
Like, he's out at 10:30 at night just talking to people. That's what a reporter does in my mind. That's the archetype of the reporter is Daly out at 10:30 just talking to people on the street.
Yeah, boots on the ground. Yep. Yeah. I know. Well, this has been awesome. I'm really excited your piece is getting as much attention as it's getting. I'm glad to give it more attention. I think everyone should read it. I hope it is turned into a book, as it should be. So you mentioned you are working on something longer, which I think is so important. And we will have you back on when that comes out. And I also just respect you as a writer. You're such a great writer. I mean, I was highlighting all these like paragraphs from your piece that are just the way you write is so. You're the kind of reporter and writer. When I read your stuff, I'm like, what am I? I should quit. It's like I should. What am I doing?
That's the highest compliment.
Or I should work harder.
Make other people want to quit.
Yeah.
No. Thank you very much.
I always ask the same two questions at the end of my podcast. What is your biggest defect of character?
I think the lifelong defect of character is that I can obsess over character failings, my own failings, in a way that is narcissistic and self-defeating, and where, I think I'm like being honest and being tough with myself, but really I'm being self-indulgent by
Mm,
dwelling on these things and not finding a way to move on and get done what I need to get done.
that's a great one. And what is your biggest asset?
I'm curious.
Hmm.
I want to know.
I love that. Where can we find you?
I write for Tablet. You can find me at Tablet, and I do a podcast with my old pal Phil Clyde, the novelist, called Manifesto, a podcast that we would love to have you on at some
What do
point.
you talk about?
Manifestos. It's like
Personal
talk about-
manifestos or just any manifesto?
Could be. We've talked about, we've done Scum, the Society for Cutting Up Men, which was Valerie Solanas, who shot Andy Warhol, her manifesto. We've done poetry manifestos. We've done jazz manifestos. We've done racial manifestos.
We were just joking about, because I read that whole article about, and I talk about this all the time, probably on some list, but the young people who have been TED pilled, like all of these young Gen Z kids discovered Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, and they are like, and we always joke, like, maybe they call him Uncle Ted. They're like, Uncle Ted had a point.
Right. We did the Kaczynski
Yeah.
manifesto. It was somebody who was fairly sympathetic to Kaczynski, I would say, actually.
Yeah,
so
that's what all these kids are. They're like, he made some good points. He was right about a lot of this stuff.
Have you read the manifesto?
Yeah, they don't. I've been rereading it because I read this article, and I've just been going down like the 90s domestic terrorism rabbit hole because my husband and I he hadn't really gone down the Ruby Ridge because we watched the Waco stuff, and I was like, if you think that's fucked up, wait until you see what happened at Ruby Ridge. And then we were talking, he's like, I'm on some watch list, because then he was Googling, like, when did the Oklahoma City bombing happen? And what about Ted? Because I'm like, we're on a watch list now. But it was such an interesting, crazy, weird time. And, we're both in our I'm in 44, he's 48. So that was like, we were very aware of what was going on in the world in the 90s. And the young people don't really know that much about it. And it's interesting to see like Gen Z discover this kind of manifesto about the technological world that they now have inherited. Yeah. And they're like, Uncle Ted was right. We disagree with his methods, but...
Yeah, there was like they had pine tree icons or something like that. Was the Kaczynski crowd on Twitter? They were using weird stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, I get it. I don't know that it's the healthiest response, but I get where it's coming from.
Well, this has been so fun. I would love to go on your manifesto podcast. That sounds like a blast. And I look forward to reading more of your stuff. What do you have anything big coming out?
I think that I'll be doing some more disinformation related pieces definitely over the next few months. And then, I'm shopping this book around, and that'll come out in the next year. Hopefully like a year from now, something like that for a publication date. And then just because I don't think I can stop myself, I do think I'm going to write something on the politics around gender and transgender stuff, because I am fascinated by it. And I feel like there's not enough sort of honest dealing with the fascination. Like, I'm not so interested in delivering a political judgment, or I have some feelings. I mean, I've drawn some conclusions about how I feel about certain political aspects, but on an even more fundamental level, I just don't think the human side of this has been given enough pure, curious, unpolitical attention. Like, what is it that we're trying to become, or what is being brought into being here? What is manifesting itself? And I'm just fascinated by it, honestly.
But it also feels in conjunction with this huge state operated information. Like, how is it everywhere? That's what I want to know. How did it go in 5 years? I mean, Rogan has a joke about this that he's doing on stage right now, where he's like, if 20% of you go into work and say men can't get pregnant, you'll lose your job. You might lose your job. How did that happen?
Through precisely the same, Wesley Yang has a good phrase for it, the vertically integrated messaging apparatus.
Yeah.
Through precisely the same messaging apparatus that has delivered every other meme from Russiagate to remember when there was a fascist plot to destroy the post office?
Yeah.
Remember the kids in cages at the border?
Yeah.
The literal genocide of trans kids, the P tapes, these are video cassettes, but they're all slotted into the same broadcasting machinery. The meme gets swapped out, but the underlying infrastructure remains the same. But my thing is that there's the media philosopher Marshall McLuhan. He talks about technologies being extensions of the human. So different technologies extend different aspects of the human, and you could say diminish or eclipse other. So there is a human, a character, something innate that is a person. And there are different dimensions of the person, and different technologies draw out or atrophy particular dimensions. And so while the way in which this has become the cause of our time is like maybe top down, vertically controlled, there is still something underlying it that is inside of these teenage girls, for instance, who are deciding that they're boys, or who want to be boys, or who feel like they're boys. And what that thing is fascinates me. I feel both sympathy and fascination.
Right.
And I just want to explore that in as honest and frankly, like, unpolitical a way as possible, because the politics are not important. They're obviously important, because the politics have to do with how it becomes the pathogenic effect, but there's still something underlying that at the individual level that I'm just fascinated by.
Yeah, this is something that comes up almost every podcast and every day in my life now. And if I never hear about it again, it won't be too soon. And every comedian is doing jokes about it, and every single news outlet is talking about it. And I mean, I think Abigail Schreier's done a great job of compassionately looking at what is going on. And I don't think anyone in America's inbox is more full of desperate parents trying to understand exactly what you're asking, what is going on, than her. I still can't. It's so hard to parse what it's drawing out. Is this like just the next evolution of humans as we evolve to be transhuman? We have to go through this. I could be a boy or a girl till like I can swap out my arm with a bio arm, and now I'm not. Mary Harrington talks about how the pill was really the first time we applied technology to the human body in a way, and how it's all been kind of leading down this road. And she's very fascinating and writes in depth about a lot of the psychology that underpins this weird application of technology to our own personhood. It's what's interesting to me, all of this, it is like the tip of the spear though. You can't avoid it. If you're in this discourse, you can't. Last night, there were all these videos. I don't know if you saw them going viral, and they were from school board
Oh, the
protests.
thing in LA with the Armenian
But
parents.
also there was another one somewhere else. There were two. And I was like, it's going to get really interesting watching the leftists try and explain why these Armenians and like all these people that they generally are like, we're champions of the minorities. When they realize that most of these people are like immigrant families are socially conservative on some degree. And it was like watching intersectionality implode in real time. You know, it was just fascinating to see like Antifa, and then there's all these primarily white women protesting Muslim women. I was like, what is this? Is crazy. This is gonna get
Yeah.
crazy. So yeah, I'm interested in anything you write, especially like this what is going on with the desire. But as a woman, all I can tell you, and I've said this many times, is that had there been a way to escape my body when I was going through puberty that was socially acceptable and top down condoned from all of the coolest people in society, and the government was accepting of it, and the media was all for it, and it was a way to get status, I absolutely would have taken that route. I was so uncomfortable in my body. I definitely would have been like, hell yeah.
But do you think that would maleness have felt like a refuge from the thing you were trying to escape? Would you like?
I mean, I really wanted to be a boy.
Yeah.
I really was. I was jealous of how easy I perceived boys to have it. They seemed to have it easy, and it might have just been an illusion, but even just the fact that they could pee standing up, like there were so many things about being a boy that seemed. And it is weird too, because the joke I always make about this is patriarchy so crafty. And I'm like, this is, if there was a way, women had some power for like 50 years, you know, like we had a good run. And now everybody's like, you know what, you should be, if I looked around, I'd be like, yeah, I kind of want to be a boy. They seem to still manage to stay on top that way. It's interesting. There's a lot there.
Yeah,
of course it is. Of course it is. Yeah. That's something that I underestimated, and my years working at Playboy and interviewing men, they disabused me of any notion that I had that it was easier to be a man than a woman. There's, in some ways it is, but there was stuff that I was reading, men would write. I would do these pieces about, I'd be like, write me if you were balding, write me if you have erectile dysfunction, and I would just kind of pick a topic. And the emails I got were so heartbreaking. I always just assumed men had it so much easier, and that was something that was corrected in my early 30s. That view.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to see your take on this. It's since everyone's got a take.
You have to have one. You know, I think Mary Harrington is brilliant. She's a great writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot to the transhumanist element of this, but I just want to understand sort of what it feels like at the individual level.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and that's it. I'm driven by a real fascination and curiosity that I don't want to attach a politics to, because I know that at its core, the reason why I'm watching all these videos about this and the reason why I'm reading all these stories about it is not because I care about what law gets passed in a certain state. It's because there is some human drama at the center of this that is so fascinating and urgent that I can't look away from it. And so I just want to stare at it and see what I come up with.
Yeah, I like that.
I'll let you know.
Yeah. I mean, I've had a couple detransitioners on the podcast, one of whom, Helena, is so articulate and brilliant. And
oh yeah, she wrote something for me. She's phenomenal. She wrote
brilliant.
A great piece for me.
Yeah. And I had her kind of walk me through psychologically what was going on. And it's fascinating just hearing it from that perspective of, and their voices are getting louder, detransitioners, but they have such a unique and insightful perspective on this that I feel like needs to be elevated a little bit more, not just by right-wing media.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like, who else is gonna do it?
I know.
I
I know.
wish that it wasn't so partisan.
I know.
It appears to be, you know?
Well, this has been a blast. I will let you go. And thank you so much for your time.
For me as well.
And I'll
Thanks,
see you around.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.